Hello, welcome to the Rabbi and The Shrink. I'm Margarita Gurri, Dr. Red Shoe, and this is
Rabbi Yonason Goldson.
And we have today one of our dear friends, and it's Dave Bricker. Hello, Dave Bricker.
Hello, Dave Bricker. Oh, wait a second.
Dave introduced the good rabbi and I, so it's nice that he's here. And I've been trying to get Dave on, but he's on finally. Dave is an interesting guy because he's really good at lots of things. And one of my favorite things about him is that he sailed the world thousands and thousands of miles in search of stories. But I know, Dave Bricker, that even if he had gone nowhere, the stories would have found him anyway. He's a speaker, a presentation coach, a business storyteller, and one of the people I go to when I'm trying to find the right word choice. He's ever bit as much a wordsmith as the rabbi and I, and he's never short an opinion. So he'll tell me, Margarita, that stinks. And I go, okay, thanks. So that kind of discernment and delicious honesty is hard to come by. Today, he says, if you want to say it, share it, sell it, or bring a story, he'll help you tell it. Dave Bricker, welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink.
Great to be here. I'm excited about today.
Great to have you, Dave.
Well, we talked about what you want to talk about, and it's ethics of storytelling. Talk to us, sir. What are the ethics of storytelling?
Well, that's almost as vague as that other thing, but I'll
My specialty, Dave, my specialty.
But I think there's a lot of confusion about storytelling in terms of when we tell a story to other people, does that story have to be 100% true? And our initial reaction is, of course, it has to be true. But I think that storytelling is very different from journalism. And the reason I'm stumbling over that is because it's important that if we are going to impact an audience, whether that's a group of people in a room or a reader, our job is to transform the audience. And whether the story is true is not nearly as important as whether or not it delivers the desired transformation. So I encourage people to be a journeyist, not a journalist.
So what's the difference? What is a journeyist?
A journeyist is someone who tells a story, and a story always journeys from conflict to transformation, and stories are always about people. When you tell that story, you tell your story, you make it a metaphor, a symbol for your listener's story. And you're telling your story about your listener, if you will. And the reason they're paying attention is that they realize that you're really talking about them and you're offering them a lesson, you're offering them a new idea, a new way to look at the world, a new way to find something within themselves. So you're telling your story, but it's always in the service of the person you're telling to. Whereas a journalist lays out what happened today. So the story that, okay, Yonason and Margarita invited me to be on their show today, that's not a story. That's just a piece of journalism. That's just something that happened. But if through the course of this discussion today, we reveal some truths that can serve people and motivate people and inspire people, then that's a story we might tell. Let's see if we can make that happen today.
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, what I think you're saying, and what I certainly believe is the story, and then there's the meta story. There is the lesson that we want to communicate through that story. And so in the Jewish tradition, we have a vast library and tradition of parables, proverbs, what are called midrashim, which are stories that fill in the gaps in sometimes the scriptural narrative. And it's very interesting because it's not always clear to what degree these stories are meant to be understood literally or meant to be understood as truth. And that itself generates a tremendous amount of debate. The question, though, is that if I am presenting a parable, I remember in high school reading Ursula K. Le Guin, and in her introduction, she says she's a storyteller and she's teaching lessons. Through her made-up story, she says, disbelieve everything I say, I'm telling the truth. And 45 years later, I still remember that quote because I think there's so much truth in it. But if I'm telling a narrative as fact, I don't necessarily have to include all the details. There are ways I can simplify the story or streamline the story, but if I consciously change the content of the story, does that not compromise my integrity as a teacher of truth?
It depends on whether your goal is to teach truth or document fact. And truth and fact are cousins. They're related, but they're not necessarily the same thing. I'll give you a very simple example. There was a place in my sailing memoir where I kind of give my reader a tour of the Abacos of the Northern Bahamas. I had a friend sailing with me, and we went from island to island to island to island. Now, in real life, I visited those islands at different times and not in that order and not always with the same person, but I really spared my reader a lot of anchoring and moving back and forth and trivial stopping points. I just wanted to take my reader on that tour of that island group. And so I changed the chronological layout. And I think that that serves the reader. The fact is that life doesn't unfold in neat, tidy paragraphs in this wonderful order. It's kind of a jumble, and we have to make sense of it and put it together. So if I was writing something for a newspaper, or if I was writing a documentary, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. I'm trying to be true to the facts. It's my goal. But if I want my reader to experience those islands, why put them through all of that navigating and anchoring for the same ends, just to serve some sort of truth?
I think that's absolutely defensible because you're not really making anything up. You're, as I said before, you're streamlining the story.
Mm-hmm.
If you would include you had been to some place you had not gone to, then I think you're crossing a line to, maybe there's some, let me give you an example. One of my favorite movies is Miracle. It's about the United States 1980 Olympic hockey team. And,
I love that.
I lived through it. And it's a wonderful story. And the movie does a great job of creating context. What was going on in the world? What was going on in relations between the United States and the Soviet Union? I mean, it's a beautifully made movie. Well, there's this one scene where it's actually a series of scenes where he asked the players to introduce each other because they're not getting along very well in the beginning. He says, "Where are you from? Where do you go to school? Who do you play for?" And they give their names, where they come from, and the team they've been playing for. And they name their school. And then he's mad at them. They haven't been working hard, and he makes them go skating back and forth and back and forth. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And all of a sudden, when they're just dead tired, they can't take it anymore. One of the players, Mike Eruzione, says, "Mike Eruzione, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I play for the United States of America." And the music swells. And he says, "Okay, boys, that's all." He made his point. You're not playing. You're not still members of your college team. It's a beautiful scene. Never happened.
Right.
The skating back and forth happened. Now, in Hollywood, we can understand they use techniques. But if this is supposed to be a true story, and of course, I'm always worried about movies that start off with based on true events or inspired by real events. Aren't we playing fast and loose with the truth?
We are, but I think we're serving something bigger. And like anytime you're roughhousing around with the truth a little bit, you have to stay on a certain side of an intuitive line. And I think as soon as we make rules and guidelines, we end up with the same problems we do with the legal system, where we create a law and then all of a sudden we end up outlawing something that doesn't need to be outlawed. And then we create little exceptions and it all starts to unravel. And we'll get political with it, but I've been writing my first screenplay. I'm 4 episodes into a 6-episode comedy screenplay based on the time I spent living on a sailboat, traveling around and living in the anchorage. But the stories are mostly true, but I've exaggerated some of my characters a little bit and their conflicts. I've combined a few characters because it's not a documentary. And what I want is for my viewer to pay attention through the whole thing. I want them to relate to the conflicts, and I want them to laugh and get a good feeling out of the whole thing. And in order to accomplish that, I need to stick closer to storytelling principles that work than I do to the truth. If I laid things out exactly as they happened first of all, someone else who was there would disagree with me on what happened because it was a long time ago. So it's my version of the truth anyway. But I think that especially in screenwriting, there are a lot of principles about establish the conflict in Act 1, what happens in Act 2, what happens in Act 3, how is it resolved, what's left hanging for the next episode. And if you ignore those guidelines to serve the truth, you end up with a very accurate but not very interesting screenplay.
Well, we have two comments in the chat. One from Aya, she was talking about that's where creativities and curiosity happen when we confabulate the truth a little bit for the sake of storytelling. And then Charlotte says, like the movie The Queen, where Tony Blair was later accused, having adjusted his memories of that time to what was depicted in the movie. And I think that we all adjust our memories. My own signature story about the red shoe, from what I understand from my mother, she was not wearing red shoes when we escaped communist Castro's Cuba. She was wearing cordovan brown. But as a 4-year-old, I remember red shoes, so I tell everyone I'm sticking to the story. So that's what I remember. Now, I think people are going to always have different versions of the truth. I do have trouble, though, when we have people who are in the public eye because they're wanting to be politicians, telling false versions of a story. I have a serious problem with that. I do believe that if we're telling a story on a screenplay or a movie, you can easily just say the truth was arranged to make a better story. I mean, why not just say that? Because we're not there necessarily for the truth. We're there to be entertained or educated, correct? So what were you going to say, Dave Bricker?
Well, again, I think it's a double-edged sword, and it's kind of storytelling. If storytelling is the force, there's the light side and the dark side of the force. And I mean, look, Adolf Hitler was an amazing presenter, right? Look at the influence that he had over the German people in the situations that they were in, their economy collapsing and things like that. What the truth, and the very popular truth that Adolf Hitler created, was a very dangerous one. There's an example of somebody using a blame story that just did incalculable damage. So you have both sides of it. I think any kind of stories are powerful and influential. And I think whether or not they're true is one thing, but whether you use that power for good or not is perhaps a more important concern.
And as the doctor so articulately said, we have our own versions based on our memories. And our memories are not memories of events. They're memories of memories of memories of events. And all kinds of studies show us how inaccurate those memories can be. I mean, I know that I wrote an article about something that happened when I was hitchhiking cross country. And I wrote it that it happened in Louisiana. And then subsequently, it occurred to me that, no, I don't think it did happen in Louisiana. I think maybe it happened outside of Denver. But I'm not sure of that either. I don't remember exactly where. I remember that it happened. I'm pretty sure I have the facts close to it. But as you say, Dave, when I write the story to tell people, well, I think it might have happened in Louisiana, but it also might have happened in Denver. I'm not really sure. Now I've just killed the story.
It doesn't really matter, does it?
That's not really integral to the story. So then
Yeah.
that's that sensitivity that you talk about. Being able to intuit at what point am I actually fabricating events to make my point, as opposed to simply presenting the story in the most accurate way that serves the greater purpose of telling it.
Well, one of my favorite examples is, let's think about the Santa Claus story that so many parents tell to their children. Margarita knows what's coming. She's thinking, oh no.
Well, the rabbi and I talked about that this morning.
Okay. So there's the Santa Claus story. And first of all, this is creepy. He's making a list and checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. What is he? The National Security Agency? Is he spying on us like the credit card companies and the communication companies? Or are we indoctrinating children into this whole notion that Big Brother is spying on you? So if you really take Santa Claus apart,
Then he breaks into your house.
Yeah, exactly. And the origin of the Santa Claus story, it starts off with the shamans in Lapland, up in the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle, and first of all, they observe the reindeer eating these muscaria mushrooms, which are highly psychedelic. And the reindeer eat the mushrooms and they jump up in the air and prance around. So all of a sudden, we've got the story of the flying reindeer. And of course, the shaman wears his ceremonial red and white suit, right? So, okay, Santa Claus, the flying reindeer. The story gets a little gross because people tried eating these mushrooms and it gave them terrible stomach cramps. And what they ended up doing is drinking the urine from the reindeer, which would filter out all of the stuff that gave you the cramps, but they would pass the hallucinogens through. So the shaman would go on these trips, these psychedelic kind of peyote mushroom style trips or whatever. And then they would go back to the yurt, to the lodge, which probably, look, it's December in the Arctic. There's probably 5 feet of snow. So they'd climb up on the roof and come down the lodge pole with these bags of gifts. And of course, all of this wacky psychedelic mushroom ritual with reindeer on hallucinogenic trip gets translated into a children's story. So do we really want to tell, well, I mean, what you want to tell to your children is one business. I mean, even the adapted version's kind of creepy if you think about it, but we're all going to tell the Santa Claus story and it's cute and children love it. And it sells a lot of movies for Hollywood and that's fine. But think about the truth of it. Does anybody really even want to know the truth of the Santa Claus story? I probably made a bunch of people angry just telling it. I didn't make it up. You can research this. It's
Well, and that's one of the issues we're talking about storytelling. And there's difference between cultures and customs. And, does it make sense to repeat it? I don't know whether it does or not. I certainly repeated it to my kids. There's the Tooth Fairy. There's the Easter Bunny. There's all sorts of stuff. I mean, there is magic in the world. And sometimes magic gets a little help from a story. And I also think that sometimes it's the symbol of what is Santa Claus, the symbol of you get good things if you're a good girl or boy. Mm-hmm. The idea of coal was not introduced to my family, but I know that some American kids I grew up with would every now and then get coal. So the whole idea of a story and a myth and a culture, those are all interesting things to talk about. Rabbi, I put in the chat an article that you wrote, which I love, Nothing But the Truth. And you speak in there about a Jewish term, the emes. If you wouldn't mind speaking that whole issue in lieu of Santa Claus and other childhood stories.
Yes. The biblical verse says, distance yourself from a false word. It can also be read, distance yourself from a false thing. Both are legitimate translations. But it's the structure of the verse. It doesn't say don't lie. It says distance yourself. It means that we have to create a sense of distance, a sense of aversion to that which is false. Now, what is falsehood? We could really get into the weeds here. I give you a whole theological, philosophical treatise here.
My asthma's already.
Yeah, but let me set it up this way. One of my rabbis uses this illustration. You're standing on a street corner. Guy comes running fast past you at breakneck speed and turns the corner and heads off in the other direction. A moment later, another guy comes running up, holding a knife and says, "Which way did that guy go?" Well, he went off to your right, so you'd point to the left and say he went that way. Now, you told a factual lie. You told a factual untruth. But in the language of Jewish thought, the word emes, which translates as truth, doesn't merely mean what's factual. It means what is proper and meta true. Helping somebody else commit murder is not a time for being factual.
Yeah.
Right? The word sheker, which is translated as falsehood, means that which is improper. It's meta-false. And so there is an acknowledgement that there's more to truth than facts.
Sometimes we have to do or say the wrong thing for the right reason.
Yeah, but that's so dangerous, because once we know that, everything really can unravel. And now I can justify, I can rationalize anything. There's a wonderful story in Jewish tradition about Aaron, the high priest, that when he would see there was a fight between two friends, he would go to one friend and he would say, your friend is so upset. He really wants to get back together. And you go to the other one and say, your friend is so upset. He really wants to make up. And you go back and forth until eventually they were both appeased and they would come and make up. Now, was Aaron lying? Well, on some level he was, but on a deeper level, if you have a fight with your friend, don't you really want to make up? So it's a very, very tricky business, fleshing out, where does the truth lie? What's the higher level of truth? And am I really just trying to find manipulations and distortions to serve my own purposes? Or am I really committed to finding that higher truth?
You remind me, a friend of mine asked me recently, he said, "Dave, what's the difference between a salesperson and a con artist?" Okay, that's an interesting question. And I don't know. He said, their methods are the same, but the salesperson delivers on their promises. So the suggestion being that whatever you need to do to exert your influence to close that sale, obviously you don't want to point a gun at somebody or something like that. That's not ethical influence. But if you are doing something perhaps to attract somebody's attention, to get them interested in your message or your product or your service, and then you deliver and you offer more value, does it really matter what you baited the hook with? Aren't we all selling all the time? Aren't we trying to convince kids to go to bed, people to give us a raise or a promotion, someone to go out to dinner with us, whatever it may be? We're negotiating and influencing all the time. And there's all sorts of ethical ups and downs and ins and outs in there. And maybe on some level, one way of looking at it is, are you going to deliver value at the end of the day? Is that where we judge the integrity?
I don't know. I think that a lot of little kids, when they get caught, I didn't tell you the truth because I didn't want to hurt your feelings or have you disappointed in me. Well, who does that serve? I think that I like to think that a con artist and a salesperson are very, very different. My father would have also said that there's a difference between fooling people and delighting them, because people like to be delighted with maybe rich versions of playing with the truth. It's kind of magic, verbal magic and imagery. I don't think they're the same, a con artist and a salesperson.
Well,
I understand the point.
Yeah, they're not at all the same, but
No.
but that distinction of delivering on the promise or not is a huge one.
But the idea of the methods, I don't think that the method is the same. If one is intending to deliver value, then by definition, how can the method be the same? It cannot, from an outside point of view, until the value has been proven and the delivery has been certified, maybe it looks the same, but I think they're very different things.
Well, think about marketing techniques.
Yes.
I mean, how much psychology goes into, they've done studies. If they play German music in the aisle where they're selling the wine, you're more likely to buy German wine. And if they're playing French music, you're more likely to buy French wine. And you'll always have the three bottles: the one that's outside your price limit, the one that's really cheap, and the one they want you to buy,
right?
Which is there.
I mean,
so it's set up that way to get you to go for that product. And so I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, Dave, that if I'm doing it to benefit my customer, right? If I have a service, this is something they teach us in business, because many of us, especially in the speaking world, right? We're very idealistic, where we have this message that we think is really important, and we hate selling ourselves. And if I have a message that's going to benefit other people, don't I have a duty to convince them of the value that I will bring to them for their benefit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I'm sincere in that, then whatever techniques I use that are not overtly dishonest are good. But if I'm really not going to serve them, and it's all about my profit, and I'm somehow misrepresenting myself or what my value is, then I am a crook.
Yeah, and I'll give you some gray to grapple with, because there are a lot of people using, for example, I don't know where that came to me. I like that. I think I'll use that.
It could just be the rabbi's story. Rabbi,
right.
The link for your book again.
But for example, you get people who practice NLP, and maybe they're doing a sales video, and at a certain point they'll say, "Buy now." You're probably wondering what this costs, and the consumer's hearing "buy now." it's this embedded command, and it's like, okay, do you really want to play with people's minds like that? And then you wonder, like, okay, well, you do want them to buy now. You're spelling things out, whether they're hearing it subliminally or entirely consciously. And again, if what you're selling them is going to impact their lives in some positive way, does it matter? I don't know. I think the outcome, I think the outcome is the deciding factor, which makes me think a little bit more about, does it matter what you bait the hook with, as long as you're delivering some sort of transformation that's in excess of what you're charging for your program?
And that's the question, isn't it?
This is why we say in almost every episode, there's no app for being ethical.
Yeah.
Right.
And I always add yet, because I think that maybe someday.
Well, I hope not. Because
I hope so. There will be a decision-making
it's
tree with questions asked. It's not going to be an app with answers, but maybe an app with better questions. I do think there should be an app.
It's asking the questions, and it's grappling with them. That builds our ethical muscles.
Yeah, I think so. So here, Dr. Jenny says most people think they're impacting someone else's life when they sell their goods. Socialists, communists, evangelicals all use those tactics because they believe in their products. I don't like being confronted by any of them.
And I agree. I feel that way. I mean, I'm maybe it's one of the things that has fueled my interest in storytelling and in sales. As soon as somebody comes up to me and I feel like they're trying to push something on me, I get a little flashing yellow light on my bullshitometer, and it's like, I want to run. I want to run away. I hate being sold to. But at the same time, we all want to be listened to, and we all have value to offer. And even, again, you're using socialists, communists, evangelicals. And I think it's one thing to make an offer, and it's another thing to push yourself on people. And this comes back, I think, more more to sales technique, which is, if you think you can hit someone over the head with your offering and get them to buy into it, you're not going to do very well. So in something like this, where there's a movement, whether it's a political movement, a religious movement, a social movement, I think the best way to sell those things is to demonstrate how happy you are and inspire somebody to come up and tap you on the shoulder and ask the question, what are you doing? You look like you're having fun there. Because preaching about stuff is moral violence in a way. It really it might work for vulnerable or lonely or hungry people, but many of us have our own truths and don't want somebody interrupting our lives to tell us what our truths should be. So I completely get Dr. I don't see the whole name, but
Elishman Druxman.
Okay.
Well,
yes.
Many years ago, I had the pleasure of consulting with an ad agency that had gotten themselves into trouble with their tactics. And their response to me was, you have to put on a fake unicorn horn to show the public that it's a real unicorn. And that goes in a lack of faith that somehow people will not recognize goodness or purity or the positive features and benefits of a product or service. So they have to be lied to, like children at bedtime stories. Gentlemen, what do you think about that unicorn horn?
I'm a little baffled by it.
What's your baffling about?
Well, if it's a real unicorn, then why do you need to put a fake horn on it? I'm not getting the whole parable.
Well, their justification is, and I'm just going to dumb it down, that people are stupid. So you have to present a story that's not true, that goes with childhood fantasies, so that they can see the truth of a good product.
I'd go in the other direction. I think that ad agency and the client, but the ad agency taking charge of the message, has failed to go deep enough to discover what that client's real value is.
Absolutely. They took a shortcut.
Right. Or what it isn't. Maybe they came up with a cute campaign and they fell in love with their own graphics and their own taglines. And, I always, narcissism being the only disease in the world where the sicker you are, the better you feel. And you get graphic designers and ad agencies who are so busy building their own portfolios that they forget about their clients. But when you work with somebody, a business client, a speaker, and whatever it is, how can you guide that person to really find their authentic value story, figure out what their superpower really is? Because once you're there, there's no competition.
And that's what the rabbi was saying. Don't we have an obligation to share the value that we can offer and make a big difference? I think you made a good point about this agency. In fact, they had intended to do well and instead caught a bunch of negative attention and ruined their reputation for a long time. They eventually did recover from it. But the whole idea is they didn't believe in themselves or the product or people. They had lost their way in their day-to-day of using words as stories and shields. They had lost the true value of we're helping people find a good thing that they need, right?
And you used a really important phrase there. They're good intentions. There's a famous road that is paved with good intentions.
I've been on that road, yeah.
and it's really quite interesting because there are times when intention makes all the difference.
Yes.
And there are times when intention makes no difference. And that's just part of this ethical grayness that we have to deal with. And the knowledge of self, we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. And that's really hard.
Well, it is. And actually, that's one of the best elements of storytelling, that in order to find good stories, like any situation and any person will meet is pregnant with stories. And the thing is, which is the story you want to pick for which intention? And you miss the story unless you really know yourself. You have to know the value of that story. And what is it you're trying to present? Dave, one of my favorite of your stories, The Little Red Bucket,
Mhm.
That's fiction. Can you tell the bucket story? And I just love that story.
So to put it in context briefly, I have a whole collection of sea stories that are true or most, or adapted from truth. But I had a lesson to teach, and it was basically a plausible fictional story from within that world, where I'm sitting out in the sailboat anchorage on my boat one evening, and I look toward the channel and I see some splashing and commotion, and it's a friend of mine who is rowing out to the anchorage to get home to his sailboat. And he rows a few strokes, and then I see him stop, and the bucket is bailing the water out, little arcs of water shining in the setting sun. You can visualize it. And then he rows a little further, and before long he's bailing again a little bit faster. And by the time he gets close to my boat, I say, Bill, what's going on? Come over here. And he says, my dinghy's sinking. I don't know what the problem is. And do you forget what he asked me for? Do you have a cork? Do you have something I can plug this leak with? Can you help me find the leak? And I went down to my cabin, and I came out with a little jar of grease, a little jar of lanolin. I said, probably your drain plug dried out. Here's a rag, stuff it in the hole, grease up your plug, put it back in, and you'll probably solve the problem. And by this time, the water is rising. Oh, he's got a wet butt. The water's rising over the seat, and he's trying to keep the oars from floating away. So he tries it, and he does this crazy thing with, he pulls the plug and he puts the rag on his toe and he sticks it in the hole, and he's greasing up the plug and puts it back and bails the boat out. And lo and behold, it's not leaking anymore. And sometimes we think we need another cup of coffee, and what we really need is a couple of more hours of sleep. And sometimes we think we need a few more clients, and what we really need to do is raise our rates. And sometimes we think we need a cork, and what we really need is a little tube of grease. And it's just a little metaphor for some of the redirected energy. It works in the context. I don't tell it all the time. It never happened. It's completely fictional, but it serves the audience. It teaches an important business lesson in the right context. It's a universal lesson in the right context, right? How much of our energy do we misdirect toward the wrong solution? And it really fits in that collection of stories that I like to tell.
And what I love about it is that when people ask you about it, you could say it's a great story. Never happened. And I love that. I mean, it doesn't take away from it because you're very honest. You tell it as if it's happening, but it never happened. It's a confabulation of lessons learned and possibilities. So I love that you tell the truth about that.
And the value of the story. I mean, look, that's how I am. I don't want to out lie to people if they ask me about which part of the story is true and which part isn't. But I'm also kind of thinking, if you're talking about that, you've kind of missed what the story is really all about. I'm not trying to be a journalist. I'm trying to be a journeyist. And by painting the picture of the water splashing in the sun and the water rising up over the guy's butt and the seats, the life jackets are floating around in the dinghy and the oars are trying to float away. You're there and you can picture it. Why do you care if it's factually accurate? That's not what the story's about.
No,
and I can tell you absolutely true stories that you'd never believe.
Like the rabbi's reaction to his stories. Did that really happen? Is that true?
Yeah.
It is funny. I mean, truth is always stranger than fiction in so many ways. It's funny, but that they would even ask that. So, Rabbi, is it time for the word of the day?
Oh, well, since you ask, I suppose it is. And this word again comes to us from Susan Rooks, the grammar goddess, who we plan to have as a guest on our show in a few weeks. And it's a new word. The word is streeteries. What are streeteries? They are the restaurants that move their clientele onto the streets during COVID because they don't have enough room on the sidewalk or in their establishment. Now, why is that something that's relevant to us? Because a little over a year ago, this word never would have come into existence. because there was no context for such a phenomenon to happen. Words evolve often as a response to culture evolving. And it's important for us to preserve the integrity of language, to preserve the integrity of thought, to preserve the integrity of our traditions and values. At the same time, we have to have a certain flexibility to be able to adapt to a changing world. It's not that ethics changes, it's that situations change and culture changes. And we have to navigate, as we're sailing through life, individually and collectively, we have to navigate these stormy passages.
Hence
because
the
if we
moral
err,
compass.
that's right, exactly.
Which is one of the reasons why we wanted Dave Bricker on, because he helps people tell their stories, whether it's in writing or the spoken word. And right now, with society, we're having a renaissance of appreciating stories. Even Pope Francis said it's up to us to learn to share stories in such a way to connect us in a positive way. And Dave Bricker can do that. Dave, how can people reach you other than just saying hi right now? How can they reach you once they hang up from this podcast?
I have two websites. One is storysailing.com, SAILING, storysailing.com. And then the other is subscription content for people who want help with presentation skills. And that is 52speakingblunders.com. It's a video every week.
Okay, I put them both in the chat for anyone who needs them. So Dave, why don't you leave us with a thought about storytelling? Certainly with COVID, there's a different context, and we've had context of fake news and all sorts of stuff. What challenge do you want to leave us in terms of storytelling and how to have an impact?
Well, I'm going to try and do that and answer Aya Hosseini's question at the same time. Is it possible to stay neutral while telling stories? And I'm going to say that the answer is no, because when you are telling a story of any kind, your object should be to serve your audience, which is naturally going to make you biased toward them. And when you are telling a story and you're thinking about the benefits and value that you're going to give to your audience, you're not thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about whether your story is big enough. You're not thinking about whether they're going to like you or not. You turn nervous into service and you think about the audience. So is it possible to stay neutral while telling stories? I hope not. You shouldn't be monotone or monodynamic. So you shouldn't be physically, emotively neutral. And as far as your point of view, you should be thinking about serving other people. And that's not neutral either. Hope that is of value. Always focus on the transformation you want to deliver.
Well, and you do. I always appreciate input from Dave Bricker on any of my stories. So that's always helpful. Rabbi, do you have some final words of wisdom, sir?
Well, wisdom, I'm not sure, but I would like to tell a story. It's one of my favorite stories. It's not mine. It's James.
It's not about me.
It's not about you, although maybe it is. It's James Thurber's revision of Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the forest on her way to her grandmother's when the big bad wolf came across her and said, "Where are you going, Little Red Riding Hood?" "I'm going with this basket of goodies to visit my grandmother." "Oh, very interesting." Little Red Riding went on her way. The big bad wolf took the shortcut to the grandmother's house, came in, gobbled up the grandmother, put on the grandmother's nightgown and glasses, and got into bed. Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. "Come in," said the wolf. In came Little Red Riding Hood. Immediately, she realized that this was not her grandmother, but the wolf. Because even in your grandmother's nightgown and glasses, a wolf looks no more like your grandmother than it does like Calvin Coolidge. So, Little Red Riding Hood reached into her basket of goodies, pulled out her Colt 45 automatic, and shot the wolf dead. And the moral of the story is, little girls are harder to fool than they used to be.
And the classic one of all time is the Looney Tunes version. My favorite part is where the wolf takes the shortcut and 10 feet later he slams into the front door because the shortcut. Anyway, it's great comic theater. The old Looney Tunes, Little Red Riding Hood.
And it is, there's something to classic stories that it's not just the story, it's the spin-offs. There are so many ways we can adapt them, we can apply them, we can find new lessons. They evolve with us.
And even Pinocchio, we have something in science called the Pinocchio effect. So when you're telling a version of the truth that causes you trouble, your nose gets warmer and itches, and the inside of your eye too. So instead of the nose getting bigger, which it doesn't, it gets warmer. So I think there's a lot we can learn from any story and any storytelling genius. And I believe that Dave Bricker is one of those, the rabbi too.
Oh.
So Charlotte is saying Paper Bag Princess is a great selection of alternative classics. I don't know that one. Paper Bag Princess. You guys know that story?
Sounds like an anthology, a selection of
website, isn't
alternative.
it?
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Selection. She's okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, everyone, it's been fun talking about storytelling, and I'm glad we grappled with the truth. We're going to do another podcast just about the truth. But Dave Bricker, thank you for dazzling us with some storytelling wisdom. And I hope everyone finds the best story they can to have the best influence they can, because we sure need it.
Great.
Rabbi, final words. Dave, final words.
Just a great chance to chat with two of my favorite speakers, wonderful people. I love you both. Thank you for having me on. It's been an honor. And
a real
to
pleasure.
the audience who hid in the background here, not by their own choice, but by the way this works. So we see you, and it's great to have you aboard.
We have a good audience, that's for sure.
Yes, thank you to you, Dave. Thank you to the audience, and thank you, Doctor, for keeping us all on course.
Very, very good. It's been a nice sailing afternoon with you guys. You all take care. We'll see you next week for the Rabbi and the Shrink. And please tell your friends all about us. You take
Bon voyage.
Bye.
Safe travels.